Welcome. I'm so excited this morning to be able to welcome Caitlin Bangsund, who's a part of our congregation, and Shirley Thiessen, you guys can sit down, who are going to be sharing a bit of their stories with us today. So during Advent, we're focusing on from grief to gratitude. So not ignoring the elements of Advent that lead us to wait, that lead us to sit in kind of that season of the in-between, knowing what is and expecting and hoping what is to come. And so Shirley has this really powerful story of loss that leads her to be able to understand that grief is something that the church often ignores. And so through her story, she's been able to walk with many churches and individuals and organizations to help them know how to help people who are grieving and how to be what she would call a hope hero. And then we have our beautiful Caitlin here with us this morning. And as many of you know, Caitlin and her family went through a season of crisis. And so she's going to be sharing from her perspective, how do you help people who are walking through times that are difficult and unexpected? And so let's welcome Shirley and Caitlin this morning. All right. So we're going to have a little bit of a kind of an interview style. And Kevin, you're going to have to guide us on time. So I'll look to you every once in a while. Or you might have to, if I get too into it, you'll have to just wait furiously along the way. So I'm hoping, Shirley, if we can start with you, can you tell us a little bit about your grief story?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I would love to tell you about my family. So I have a husband named Carrie, and we have two children, a daughter, Chantel, and a son, Jordan. Well, in the year 2012, both our kids were students at Trinity Western University in BC. And you know, I just knew that year was going to be pretty significant.
Is that on? I'm not sure. Is it on?
No, maybe. Hi, is that better? Okay. Sorry about that. So 2012, my husband and I, we just knew that year was going to be significant for our kids. They were both university students. And sure enough, January, our son, Jordan, proposed to his girlfriend, Elise. We were so excited to add another family member. And then in April, they both graduated from university. What a huge accomplishment. And then after a nationwide search, Jordan landed a career job in our city, in Calgary. I was so relieved to think that our son would be living nearby. We not only loved our kids, we really liked them, and we really enjoyed hanging out together, and so we were delighted by this. October 6th, that same year, Jordan and Elise were married. You know, just like you do, with your kids, we invested so much love, time, energy, money into this kid, and we were delighted to see Jordan gainfully employed, happily married, and off our payroll. Well, just a few days after that wedding, Carrie and I went down to California for a vacation. And one day I decided, you know, it was actually October 18th. It was a beautiful day. I wanted to get to the pool in the afternoon and relax. But that day I had one errand to run. And I thought, I'm going to shop efficiently, you know, like my husband does. Just in and out. Find it, buy it, take it home, done. But as I walked into the department store, I was quickly distracted by a rack of dresses on clearance. Forgetting that I was in a hurry, I went over to have just a quick look. There was a black dress that clearly did not belong. I was really attracted to it, but it wasn't my size. I didn't need a dress. I put it back. And as I started to walk away, I heard these words. I want you to buy that black dress. You are going to a funeral. My head swung around to see who said that. There were people in the store, but no one was near me. Confused, I continued to walk away, but this time I could read the words in my head like a news ticker. Before I knew what was happening, I'm in the change room, wearing a dress. It fit so well, it felt so comfortable. But my rational thought was this: I don't know anyone who has recently died. I have no funeral to attend. Besides, I already have a black dress in my closet. What am I doing? You know, I've heard God whisper to my spirit. I felt his nudges, but never before did I feel this bold directive. I could not avoid it or deny it. I bought the dress, unsure to whose funeral I was meant to wear it. I didn't have long to wait. Just a couple hours after that shopping trip, a California police officer was at the door of our condo. In just a matter of seconds, my worst nightmare became a reality. Our 23-year-old son, married 12 days, had been killed in a workplace accident. He fell 116 feet down an elevator shaft at a power plant near Edmonton. But you know, the verse that came to my mind that day was Deuteronomy 31:8 that says, "The Lord himself goes before you. He is with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." Well, I did fall into a crisis of faith as the fog of grief started to lift, and I realized that this is permanent. The rest of my earthly life, my son is gone. And I did have such anger against God for a time. But you know what I realized? That God was loving me, patiently loving me, through caring friends. And those friends let me hope when mine was just leaking out fast. And I can talk about that today because of those caring friends who God was loving me through.
Thanks for sharing your story. I know you could go on about it. So thanks for giving that little synopsis. Caitlin, could you share just briefly a little bit about your story as well?
Briefly with my book of notes that I brought. Yes, I will try, and many of you know my story. I asked Shirley if she had notes, and she said, "No, I'm just going to do it like a podcast." And I'm like, "But I've not done many podcasts, but I always have notes." So I still have notes. And like I said, a lot of you know our story, but I'm Caitlin, and we attend this church with my husband Josh and our kids Hudson, Sawyer, and Macy, and my in-laws Patty and Mel. And when my daughter was born, that's basically when our grief crisis story began. She was taken to ambulance from High River to Calgary with collapsed lungs and blood sugar problems. So she wasn't with me my first night, or her first night on earth in High River, and about 12 days in ICU. And little did we know that would barely hit the radar, down the road. So as time went on, there were delays in milestones for Macy, and so when she was just over 1, she was diagnosed with a chromosome disorder, a chromosome deletion, a genetic disorder of sorts, and we were told it would affect her long term, but we didn't know how, and they couldn't tell us how. In the fall of 2014, Macy started to get really sick. She stopped crawling, she had a lot of hospital admissions and trips to emergency, but we didn't have any answers still until December 1st of 2014. At 21 months of age, that's when she was diagnosed with leukemia on December the 1st, 2014. And she was really sick with pneumonia and some other complications, so she couldn't start treatment until December 4th, 8 years ago, today. During her 2.5-year-long treatment protocol, she fell really sick in the fall of 2016. We had just been starting to feel like we had some capacity and things were feeling like this was our new normal and we should get back in shape and do things with our family. She got really sick though with a cold and it escalated to pneumonia again, but this time it turned into a bacterial infection and then very quickly it turned septic, which I had never understood that word is a word you never really want to hear until that day. Her lungs and her heart were sick, and so we had to make a really fast decision to put our baby on life support. She was airlifted to Edmonton. And then I guess for me, like Shirley's experience of some form of scripture or God's presence in those really dark moments, I did feel a sense of that hope existing in the darkness. I really felt God reminding me that he loved Macy more than I loved Macy, and he was the one in control, and we were able to surrender. And the song he He gives and takes away, he gives and takes away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name, was what came to me in the room that we didn't really want to be in and were just in. Her survival was really a miracle, admittedly by the hospital staff and everybody else. They didn't really think, I don't believe, that she would return back to Calgary from Edmonton. So flash forward to the fall of 2019, she was diagnosed with an intellectual disability, and this year with ADHD. And even as recently as November, our pediatrician is still sort of trying to crack this little puzzle or put together the pieces of the Macy puzzle, because there's just always things that she's mulling over as she watches her grow, and there's so many unknowns. So I guess we just never assume that the picture is complete, both setbacks and struggles for her, for her family, and victorious moments. What I grieved each step of the way was the loss of the imagined future that we had for her, for the daughter that we had that completed our family. And just, it clouds that picture, right? Trauma does, of what you envision for yourself, for your family. And Shirley and I will talk about the importance of not comparing, and when we were preparing, we did talk about that. But even while I was preparing, I found myself doing that. I was comparing my allowable grief to Shirley's and feeling like an imposter because of it. She had a loss of her son, and it's a very sad story. And she speaks about grief education, so who am I to join her up here? But as I revisited our story in preparation, I responded like a person who knows grief and trauma. And I'm not an imposter. We continue to pursue lightness and ease in a life that sometimes feels heavy, with the gaps and the losses of that imagined future. A couple of weeks ago, Macy had pneumonia, and if you were listening to my long story, she had that twice before when things were very critical. She had to be carried into the emergency room as a now 9-year-old who couldn't walk or didn't want to walk, and then she was ambulanced to Children's Hospital. And even though it's 8 years later, the trauma and the grief, they leave an imprint. And it was hard not to think that the same thing was happening again. It was not, but we just keep taking life one moment or one serving of manna at a time. And that's our story.
Oh, thanks for sharing. It's always interesting to hear the different ways that we do that comparison, isn't it? The way that we think, I don't have enough to offer. And watching you from when I met you about 4 years ago till now, the way that you carry your story is a beautiful testimony, and it's a beautiful testimony also to authenticity. So thank you so much. So Shirley, you in your book and in your writings, you talk about something called LAP. Can you tell us what that acronym means and a little bit about why it's important for us, but also why it's pivotal for you in your own journey?
Well, the younger me did not know how to come alongside my grieving friends. If I had met Caitlin, the younger me, I wouldn't have felt confident to know how to support her. And when I experienced grief, I had these hope heroes, as I call them, my caring friends, who did so many creative things to express empathy. And so I started to notice that they did 4 things, and I made an acrostic called LAP. So as for listen, I noticed that they really took an interest in listening to me, and then acknowledged the loss, which means like saying my son's name, validating that my fears about my loss are real, and then pray. We can never pray enough, especially praying that our grieving friend will lean into God and not away from him. And the last one, they were patiently present, because grief is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And the finish line is in heaven. This is a whole lifetime of reconciling to the loss. And so it was the LAP, L-A-P-P, listen, acknowledge, pray, and patiently be present, that my hope heroes did so well, that I decided I need to learn how to do that for my grieving friends.
Oh, that's great. It's easy to remember when you encounter someone who's kind of in that moment, is a listen, acknowledge, pray, and have patient presence. Now, Caitlin, when we were talking, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, you had some interesting kind of stories about misguided comfort and care. Lots of stories of people who, did, amazing things to surround you. But there were a couple words and phrases that you said are often best avoided when someone is in crisis. Could you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk to the slide first, and then I'll speak to Keith's question about, what were the missteps? What was the misguided attempt at care that you might have experienced? So the slide, you can see the bullet points, so I won't read them. And I do have a printable on my website, but also there's 2 printed out in the foyer if you want to grab one. And it's a roadmap for supporting people through a crisis. And one of the parts of it are just some of those things to try not to say. I created it because I did have people reach out and say, like, my friend's daughter or son or somebody I know has taken ill or has leukemia. What do I do? What do I say? And so that's kind of what started that. When I was brainstorming these things, I actually reached out to a bunch of oncology momcologists, if you will, and moms who had lost children as well. And mostly I agree with those points. For us, probably the biggest things to avoid that really stuck in our mind were the things like just let us know if you need anything. Just so common and so easy to say, and when I don't really fault people for that, I've said it myself, right? It's just we don't really know, and that's, I guess, what Shirley is after, is trying to equip people to take action, and then offering comparisons. And again, we're trying to empathize, and I've done it as well, right? You try to kind of fill in the awkwardness with a story that might relate, but it doesn't really help in the moment. So just like your acronym, the listening part becomes important. That said, and Shirley's going to add a couple, but that said, you don't want to end up sort of paralyzed and then saying nothing either. So don't be so fearful that that's what you do. It's still, the important part is still showing up, right? Even if we don't always say the perfect thing. So what would you add when it comes to a loss? Because none of these are sort of those specific.
Well, I've experienced where people said, well, at least you still have a daughter. Or, God must have needed another angel in heaven. Or the heavens must be brighter because your child is there. None of those things are helpful. And another common one, I think, in the church is saying, well, God wouldn't give you any more than you could handle. That's not even theologically correct. God actually gives us more than we can handle so that we turn to Him in utter dependence on Him. And so I just think these are things that I wish I had known. I really do. And so I want to help others to know how to confidently come alongside others and with empathy and, kind things to say.
Yeah, thank you. I think for the misguided part, we really had a lot of support, and we're going to speak to that in another question here. But for me, I felt like sometimes people would step away where I needed them to step in closer. And again, we don't know maybe how to deal with grief, and we're not in it, and we're busy with our lives. And you just can't know until you're in it, right? What it's really like and how lonely it can be. For me, my sort of woundedness, I guess, came from some friendships and acquaintances where I ended up feeling more like a burden, and that I should really quickly summarize things that were happening, for Macy or for our family. And that I should still be able to be there for others, to maintain my ability as a good friend. And I was struggling to show up for my own family, so that was just extra pressure, and it felt really hurtful. I ended up really feeling like I should shrink a little bit and minimize my crisis or the way that I was feeling. As a result, I don't think I grieved along the way as much, and I think we do that later a lot of the time. But it really wasn't until years later when a therapist sort of validated me and said, you have experienced chronic repetitive trauma, and you're experiencing PTSD, that I could actually go, hey, wait a minute, that was really awful. It's been awful. I didn't like any of it, and it was hard. So I think just giving the griever the room, to live within their capacity and not put expectations on them to show up like maybe they normally would, and to really do the listening part.
So, Shirley, we've heard a little bit about ways that, have been unhelpful, but what were one or two stories that, people really stepped in and gave practical and meaningful support to you when you were in the midst of grief?
Well, I want to offer you 2 examples. The first one was a 9-year-old boy who I did not know. So I was speaking at Glenmore Christian Academy to a group of grade 4 kids, 100 grade 4 kids. This is a school my kids used to attend. And after hopefully inspiring them to be hope heroes for one another, I had brought some sweets for them. It was the last class of the day, and most of the kids were running over to the sweets to get them. But a few kids kind of lined up to talk to me, and the last boy waited so patiently for his turn. And finally he came up to me and he just said, "I just want to let you to know, I'm so sorry that your son Jordan died." Well, I thanked him for his words of just acknowledging my loss. And he just held my eyes, and I thought maybe he had more to say. And he didn't. And he didn't even touch me, but I felt like I just got the biggest bear hug ever. And this little guy and I didn't know each other, we just met. So for many of us, I want to encourage you can be a hope hero to someone who you just met in a grocery store or in a lineup. If you understand that they've had a loss, just acknowledge that. That's so meaningful. And the second one is, I have a friend I don't get to see very often, but because Jordan died on the 18th day of October, my friend has sent me a text, just a short text, every 18th day of the month, January to December, for 10 years. And I can't even begin to tell you how meaningful that is, particularly as the years go by. Because she's demonstrating she is patiently present with me, because I'm still grieving, and she's acknowledging that, and she's mentioning my son's name, and just telling me how much she loves and cares for me. It's powerful. A text can be so powerful.
Oh, I love those. Caitlin, what about you?
That's a great example. I love that one. We had lots of really creative ways that people showed up for us, and a huge covering of support. So it was really fantastic and divine. Macy, when she was first diagnosed with leukemia, though, a really cool thing that Josh's work did was they started the Macy Project. And it was just a really practical way of supporting us. They had a brainstorming session, like it was a very businessy way of doing it, but it worked really well because they just gave us a huge spreadsheet, and with this super long list of creative things like shovel our snow or put up our Christmas lights, bring us food, hire house cleaners, watch the siblings, like Macy's siblings, watch the boys. And they also wanted to do a silent auction fundraiser, which many of you came to for our family. But it was all just there for us to pick and choose, right? What was helpful, yes or no. And then we didn't have to even, come up with ideas, and we could just take the help, all of it or some of it. So it just really took the pressure off, and that was fantastic. You don't really have the agency to figure out what you need, which is, I think, why that's hard when people say, let me know what you need, because you don't always know. And sometimes you don't have the capacity to even put the laundry on the deck. So maybe that's not, for someone to pick up from your step. That might not work, but maybe just watching your other kids, maybe that's like exactly what you need. And I think we can do this in such a simple way, right? Like even just a friend that's going through a hard time, like, you know what I could do this week for you? I could wrap your Christmas gifts or run some errands. So yes to both, or neither, or one of them. And that's just, it's an easy way to show up. And one other one was, we had a friend that she created little zipper pouches, and they were filled with like crayons and Kleenex and lip balm and a handwritten note of encouragement. And she gave me like 10 of these pouches so that I could just grab one when we were headed to the hospital, which was often, super unexpected or really fast. We still live in Okotoks, so it was, we had an hour, and it was like they would sometimes say, like, you need to be here in an hour, and so off we went. And again, I think that's a really simple way that we can still bless our friends in the holidays where things are heightened, but always, is just leave something on their doorstep like that. Maybe it's just a little note of encouragement, but it doesn't have to be fancy. Right? And it can have a big impact.
I remember years ago when I was pastoring in Saskatoon, one of the families, their daughter was quite ill. And one of the things because they were always in crisis, coming in and out of it, and I remember the thing that was helpful for them was parking at the hospital.
Yeah.
Is, you know, those weekly parking passes were like the thing that we gave all of the time because it was just so expensive to stay there. Thanks for sharing those stories. Now, if you could leave us with kind of a final word of encouragement or wisdom for those of us who are going to be supporting people in crisis or grief over the holidays, what would you say? Shirley.
Well, I would say I know the fear and the dread that many of us feel when we think, how are we going to come alongside a grieving friend? But let me help take the pressure off. It is not your job to fix the pain of their loss. You can't fix it. But it is a privilege and an honor to help carry it. And Galatians 6:2 says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. It is our mission to love. And so I would just encourage you to just take the pressure off. You're not there to fix it, but you're there to walk alongside and help carry it. Make it a little lighter.
What about you, Kate?
I came up with 3 things. One was just that people that are grieving or hurting, they don't have a look. You know, they don't look a certain way. So don't assume because they are carrying it well that they don't still need you, maybe months or years later. There's a quote about grief that goes, on some days I look really sad, but on others I just hide it really well. Someone can look really strong and put together but be desperate for a hug or just a chance to talk about what they're going through. And then I think if it's someone's first Christmas, I guess this is number 2, if it's their first Christmas without a loved one, or they're in hospital and they don't know what's going to happen, I think saying their name would be really important, whether they have died, and just as Shirley mentioned, how significant that is. And then if they're not sure what's going to happen, it's just give them that room to talk about their experience and their feelings right now. And then the third thing is just don't downplay how much it might mean for you to say something really simple to them. Just something as simple as, you know, it must be hard, and you are loved. And that could just, they might be a puddle. That might be all they need to hear.
Thank you so much for sharing. These are such great tips for me as a pastor and for, I'm sure, those listening in. So Shirley, before we go, you said that there was a couple of events in the city that you wanted to highlight, and then to talk a little bit about your shared book table as well.
Okay. Well, I'd like to invite all of you to come to an event on Tuesday night called Tidings of Hope at First Baptist Church. And this is an opportunity to acknowledge our losses, to remember those people who we are missing at Christmas. It's a free event, and there's going to be some beautiful music. A friend of mine is speaking, sharing his story. You will come away encouraged. And you know, think of somebody who you can invite that event to. It's for anyone. So that's definitely the event. And then I'll just speak briefly about my book. It's available in the foyer for $12. You know, think about who you could give the book to. First, read it for yourself. But think of who is grieving in your life. It could be even grieving the loss of a marriage due to divorce, or the loss of, it could be a health crisis. It could be any kind of loss. But I suggest that could be a wonderful way to gift someone else this Christmas. And in fact, any time of the year, but it's available in the foyer.
All right, Caitlin, do you want to talk quickly about your book?
Well, I wasn't going to bring my book, but then I was told I should. So it's a children's book. So it's not really the same as as what Shirley's will do, which is help equip you. And I think that's really the important part of today. But mine is about, the delighted lens through which my daughter does live her life. And so it would make a great Christmas gift for children, so ages 4 to 8. And it's just about hope in the hard times, even when there's setbacks and mountains to climb. And she is the best example of a person that lives in the moment. And it's not always practical. Like we talk about mindfulness and things like that. It's not always practical, but we try. And she is definitely a person that goes with the flow of the moment and her feelings, but she also brings delight. And so that's what the picture book is about.
Can we say thank you to Shirley and to Caitlin for sharing their stories?